The deafening gunshot echoed through Whispering Creek's dusty Main Street as Tessa Dawson collapsed to the ground, her blood staining the parched earth beneath her. It was the summer of 1876 when her voice was stolen, along with her family's lives, in a raid that shook the small Arizona Territory town to its core. Sheriff Benjamin Walsh stood over her trembling body, his weathered face grave as the town doctor examined her throat. The bullet grazed her neck, damaged her vocal cords, the physician announced to the gathering crowd. "She'll live, but I reckon she'll never speak again." From the edge of the crowd, a tall figure stepped forward, his worn boots kicking up dust with each determined stride. Adam Everett, a cowboy known more for his silent demeanor than his words, knelt beside the terrified woman. Their eyes met hers filled with tears, his with a resolve that seemed to quiet the very air around them. "Then I'll speak for her till I die," he declared, his voice carrying across the sudden hush of the onlookers. No one in Whispering Creek knew then how those words would change everything, or how a vow made in the heat of tragedy would blossom into something neither of them could have imagined. Tessa had arrived in Whispering Creek just 3 months prior, traveling west with her father and younger brother after losing their mother to consumption back in Missouri. They'd built a modest homestead on the outskirts of town, hoping for the fresh start that the frontier promised to those willing to work for it. Now, as Adam carried her broken body to Doc Miller's office, that promise lay shattered like the silence that would become her prison. The doctor worked diligently to clean and dress the wound across her neck, his fingers gentle but his expression grim. "The damage is severe, Miss Dawson. I've seen this kind of injury before in the war. Your vocal cords are likely permanently damaged." Tessa's eyes widened in panic as her hand flew to her throat. She tried to speak, but only a raspy wheeze emerged, followed by searing pain. "Don't try," Adam said, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Save your strength." Sheriff Walsh stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "I'll need a statement, but—" He trailed off, realizing the impossibility of his request. Adam turned to face him. "Tell me what you need to know. I'll help her communicate." The sheriff nodded solemnly. "We need to know who did this, who attacked the Dawson homestead." Tessa's face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her dirt-streaked cheeks. With trembling hands, she mimicked the motion of writing. "Paper," Adam translated immediately, turning to the doctor. "She needs paper." Doc Miller rummaged through his desk and produced a sheet of yellowed paper and a pencil. Tessa's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pencil, but she managed to scrawl 3 words: "Men in masks." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Likely the Blackwater gang. They've been hitting homesteads up and down the territory." He looked at Tessa with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry about your pa and brother, Miss Dawson." Adam watched as Tessa's shoulders shook with silent sobs. He didn't know her well, had only seen her in town on supply runs, her golden hair catching the sunlight as she shopped for provisions with her father. He'd tipped his hat to her once or twice, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. Yet something in her quiet dignity, and now her terrible vulnerability, called to something deep within him. "She can't stay alone," Adam said suddenly, "not with killers on the loose." "The town will look after her," the sheriff replied. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house has a spare room." Adam shook his head. "With all due respect, Sheriff, Mrs. Peterson is nearly deaf and half blind. How's Miss Dawson supposed to call for help if she can't make a sound?" The logic was irrefutable, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "What are you suggesting, Everett?" The sheriff asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "My sister Abigail's place has room. It's the closest to town, and she could use the company while her husband's away driving cattle." Adam turned to Tessa. "If that would be acceptable to you, Miss Dawson." Tessa looked up at him, studying his face, the earnest blue eyes, the firm set of his jaw partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. She knew little of him beyond his reputation as a hard worker who kept to himself. In 3 months of living in Whispering Creek, she'd heard him speak perhaps a dozen words total. Yet here he was, offering to be her voice. Slowly, she nodded. "It's settled then," Adam said, with a finality that brooked no argument. "I'll take her to Abigail's tonight after the doctor's finished." As night fell over the doctor's office, Tessa sat on the edge of the examination table, her mind reeling with grief and shock. Her father and brother were gone. Her voice was gone. In the span of a single day, everything she knew had been ripped away. Adam returned with a wagon, helping her climb aboard with careful hands. The journey to his sister's homestead was made in silence, a silence that would now define Tessa's life. Abigail Everett Mason was cut from the same quiet cloth as her brother, but her efficiency spoke volumes as she prepared a room for Tessa without prying questions. "You're safe here," was all she said, patting Tessa's hand before leaving her to rest. That first night, Tessa lay awake, staring at unfamiliar shadows cast by moonlight on strange walls. The pain in her throat was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. Silent tears soaked her pillow until exhaustion finally claimed her. Morning brought a gentle knock at her door. Adam stood there with a small slate and chalk. "Thought this might help," he said, extending the simple gift toward her. "My nephew used it for his schooling before they moved west." Tessa accepted it with a grateful nod, immediately writing, "Thank you." Adam nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "I'll be outside if you need anything. Got some work to do around the place." As the days passed, a routine developed. Adam would work the small ranch that bordered his sister's property during the day, stopping by to check on Tessa at noon and again in the evening. Abigail, pregnant with her second child, welcomed the extra help around the house that Tessa eagerly provided. Communication was difficult at first. Tessa's frustration manifested in tightly clenched fists and tearful nights. But slowly, she and Adam developed their own language, a combination of written words, gestures, and expressions that bridged the gap between her silence and his natural taciturnity. One evening, about 2 weeks after the attack, Sheriff Walsh rode out to the homestead. Adam met him at the gate. "Any news?" he asked, his voice low so it wouldn't carry to the house where Tessa was helping Abigail prepare supper. The sheriff shook his head. "Nothing solid. The Blackwater gang hit another place up near Tucson. Same pattern, masked men, no witnesses left." He cleared his throat. "Except this time they left a message, said they don't leave loose ends." Adam's jaw tightened. "You think they'll come back for her?" It wasn't a question, and the sheriff didn't treat it as one. "I think Miss Dawson is the only person who's ever seen them and lived. Even if she can't speak, she could identify them." "Then I'll be ready," Adam said, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver on his hip. "You can't stand guard forever, Everett." Adam's gaze was steady. "I made a promise," the sheriff sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Adam's shoulders. "Just be careful. These aren't ordinary outlaws, they're organized and they're ruthless." After the sheriff departed, Adam returned to the house, his expression betraying none of his concern. Tessa looked up from setting the table, her brow furrowing at whatever she saw in his face. She reached for her slate. "Bad news." He considered lying, then thought better of it. "Sheriff's still looking for the men who attacked your homestead." Her eyes darkened with understanding. She wrote quickly, "They'll come for me." Adam shook his head firmly. "I won't let that happen." That night, Adam didn't return to his own cabin. Instead, he sat on Abigail's porch, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. He didn't tell Tessa, but she knew. She brought him coffee before sunrise, her footsteps so light he almost didn't hear her approach. She handed him the steaming cup along with her slate, which read, "You need sleep too." Adam accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "I'll sleep when you're safe." Tessa studied him for a long moment before writing, "Why are you doing this?" It was a fair question. They were little more than strangers 3 weeks ago. Adam took a sip of coffee, buying time as he considered his answer. "When I was 16, he finally said, "I watched a man die because no one would stand up for him. He wasn't from around here, didn't speak much English. Some men decided he'd stolen something, though he hadn't. They hanged him while half the town watched." He stared into his coffee cup. "I was too young, too scared to do anything, but I promised myself I'd never stand by again when someone needed help." Tessa touched his arm lightly, drawing his attention back to her slate. "You're a good man." The simple words struck him deeply. He hadn't thought of himself as particularly good or bad, just a man trying to make his way through a hard world. But seeing himself reflected in her eyes made him want to be worthy of that assessment. As April turned to May, life settled into a new pattern. Tessa remained at Abigail's, though discussions of what would happen to her homestead arose occasionally. The property was legally hers now, but the idea of her returning to live there alone was unthinkable to Adam. "You could sell it," he suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of orange and purple. "Use the money to start fresh somewhere safe." Tessa shook her head vehemently, writing, "It's all I have left of them." Adam understood. The land was more than property, it was memory, connection, roots. "Then we'll figure something else out," he promised. The next day, Adam rode into town to speak with the bank manager about Tessa's mortgage. To his surprise, he found the sheriff engaged in a heated discussion with a well-dressed stranger outside the bank. "Mr. Everett," the sheriff called, spotting him. "This here is Marshal Theodore Grant from the Territorial Office. He's here about the Blackwater gang." Adam nodded a greeting, instantly alert. Any progress catching them, the marshal, a lean man with cold eyes and a precisely trimmed mustache, studied Adam with undisguised assessment. "I understand you're harboring a witness." The phrasing set Adam's teeth on edge. "Miss Dawson is staying with my sister while she recovers." "I need to speak with her," the marshal stated. "I have questions about what she saw." "She can't speak," Adam reminded him, "so I've heard." "But she can write, can't she?" "The gang has hit 3 more homesteads since the Dawsons, 12 people dead, including 2 children. The marshal's voice was clinically detached. "Any information she has could help us stop them." Adam nodded slowly. "I'll take you to her." "But she's been through enough trauma. I won't have you badgering her." The marshal's eyebrow arched slightly. "Awful protective of a woman who's not your kin, Mr. Everett." "I gave my word to speak for her," Adam replied evenly. "That includes making sure she's treated with respect." The ride back to Abigail's homestead was tense, with the marshal asking probing questions about Tessa and Adam's relationship that Adam deflected with increasing irritation. Tessa was hanging laundry when they arrived, her golden hair catching the sunlight as she stretched to pin a sheet to the line. She turned at the sound of approaching horses, her face lighting briefly at the sight of Adam before registering the strangers accompanying him. "Miss Dawson," the sheriff called in greeting. "This is Marshal Grant from the Territorial Office. He has some questions about the attack if you're feeling up to it." Tessa's hands trembled slightly, but she nodded, gesturing toward the house. Inside, Abigail provided coffee for the men while Tessa retrieved her slate. The marshal wasted no time on pleasantries. "I need you to describe the men who attacked your family. Height, build, any distinguishing features." Tessa wrote carefully. 3 men, all wore bandanas over their faces. 2 tall, 1 shorter. The leader had a scar across his right hand. "A scar?" The marshal leaned forward. "What kind of scar?" Tessa drew a jagged line across her slate, then pointed to the space between her thumb and forefinger. The marshal and sheriff exchanged significant glances. "That matches the description of Jake Harden," the sheriff said. "He used to run with the McClintock outfit before they were caught." "Could you identify these men if you saw them again?" the marshal asked Tessa. She hesitated, then wrote, "Maybe the leader had unusual eyes, 1 blue, 1 green." The marshal nodded, a hint of satisfaction crossing his features. "Heterochromia, that's Harden all right." He turned to Adam. "Miss Dawson may need to testify if we catch these men." Adam frowned. "How? She can't speak." "She can identify them, point them out in a lineup, that's all we need." After the lawman departed, Tessa sank into a chair, visibly exhausted by the ordeal. Adam sat across from her, concern etched on his features. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, then wrote, "Scared, if they find out I can identify them." "They won't come near you," Adam assured her, though the promise felt hollow even as he made it. How could he guarantee her safety against determined killers? That night, Adam's fears manifested in a nightmare about Tessa in danger while he stood helpless, unable to reach her. He woke in a cold sweat, the first light of dawn barely touching the horizon. Making a decision, he saddled his horse and rode to Tessa's abandoned homestead. The small cabin stood silent, bearing the scars of violence. Bullet holes pocked the wooden walls, and the door hung askew from broken hinges. Inside, dried blood stained the floorboards, a stark reminder of what Tessa had lost. Adam spent the day making repairs, fixing the door, patching the bullet holes, scrubbing away the blood. It was past sundown when he returned to Abigail's, his hands raw and his back aching. Tessa was waiting on the porch, her face taut with worry. She thrust her slate at him. "Where have you been?" "Your place," he answered honestly. "It needed fixing." Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with emotion. She wrote, "Why?" Adam ran a hand through his hair, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. "You said it was all you had left of them, figured it should at least be standing strong." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes as she wrote, "Thank you." The next morning, Tessa insisted on seeing the homestead. Adam was reluctant, worried the memories would be too painful, but he recognized the determination in her eyes. They rode out together, Tessa sitting behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped securely around his waist. The sight of the cabin, with its repaired door and freshly patched walls, brought fresh tears to Tessa's eyes. She walked slowly through the small structure, touching familiar objects, her father's pipe still on the mantel, her brother's whittling knife on the table. Outside, she knelt beside two fresh graves that neighbors had dug for her father and brother. Adam stood back, giving her privacy for her silent grief. When she finally rose, her face was tear-streaked but composed. She wrote on her slate, "I want to come back here." Adam's brow furrowed. "It's not safe," she wrote firmly. "It's my home." They argued as much as one could argue with written words all the way back to Abigail's. Adam listed all the reasons it was dangerous. Tessa countered each one with stubborn insistence that she couldn't hide forever. "At least wait until they catch these men," Adam finally pleaded. Tessa considered this, then nodded reluctantly. She wrote, "But I want to visit, work the garden, keep it alive." Adam couldn't refuse her that much. "We'll come out a few times a week," he agreed, "together, never alone." June bloomed across the territory, bringing scorching heat and afternoon thunderstorms that briefly transformed the arid landscape into a riot of wildflowers. Tessa and Adam fell into a routine of visiting her homestead every third day, tending the small garden and making additional repairs to the cabin. On one such visit, as Adam repaired the roof while Tessa weeded the garden below, the peaceful scene was shattered by the distant sound of approaching riders. Adam froze, listening intently before scrambling down the ladder. "Inside," he said urgently, helping Tessa to her feet. "Could be nothing, but—" They hurried into the cabin, Adam positioning Tessa behind him as he peered through the window. 3 riders approached, their faces obscured by the dust kicked up by their horses. "Stay here," Adam whispered, drawing his revolver. "If anything happens, run out the back and head for the creek bed. You can follow it all the way to town." Tessa grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear, not for herself, he realized, but for him. She shook her head vehemently. "I'll be fine," he assured her, though he felt far from certain. The riders pulled up outside the cabin, and Adam's tension eased slightly as he recognized one of them. "It's the marshal," he told Tessa, holstering his weapon. He opened the door as the men dismounted. "Marshal Grant, didn't expect to see you out this way." The marshal nodded a greeting. "Mr. Everett, Miss Dawson, thought I'd find you here," he gestured to his companions. "Deputies Hayes and Rodriguez, we've got news." Inside the cabin, the marshal removed his hat, revealing sweat-dampened hair. "We've tracked down one of Hardin's men. He's in custody in Tucson." He fixed his gaze on Tessa. "We need you to come identify him." Tessa's face paled and Adam stepped forward. "Is that necessary? Can't you bring him here?" The marshal shook his head. "He's wounded, can't travel, and we need a positive identification before the circuit judge arrives next week." Adam's protective instincts flared. Tucson's 3 days' ride through open country if the rest of the gang is looking for her. "That's why we're here," the marshal said. 3 armed lawmen plus yourself. She'll be well protected." Tessa touched Adam's arm, drawing his attention to her slate. "I have to do this." He knew she was right. If they caught these men, she could finally be safe, could reclaim her home and start rebuilding her life. But the thought of exposing her to such danger made his blood run cold. "When do we leave?" he asked the marshal, his decision made. "First light tomorrow," came the reply. "Pack light but prepare for trouble." That evening, back at Abigail's, Adam cleaned his revolver and rifle with methodical precision while Tessa packed a small bag. Abigail watched them both with worried eyes, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "Thomas will be back from the cattle drive in a week," she told Adam. "If you're not back by then, we will be," Adam interrupted, not wanting to consider alternatives. Later, as the household settled for the night, Adam found Tessa sitting alone on the porch, staring at the star-filled sky. He sat beside her, the wooden step creaking under his weight. "Scared?" he asked quietly. She nodded, then wrote on her slate, "Not of the journey, of seeing him again." Adam understood. The man had murdered her family, had nearly killed her. Facing him would resurrect the worst day of her life. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We could leave, head to California, start fresh." The suggestion surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. He hadn't planned to say, it hadn't even fully formed the thought until the words were out. Tessa studied him in the moonlight, her expression unreadable. Finally, she wrote, "Would you really come with me?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Adam looked at her, really looked at her. In the 2 months since the attack, she'd become central to his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. He'd promised to speak for her, but somewhere along the way, the promise had evolved into something deeper. "Yes," he said simply, "if that's what you wanted." Tessa's eyes glistened with tears as she wrote, "I need to see this through first, then decide." Adam nodded, understanding. "Get some sleep, dawn comes early." They set out at first light, a small caravan of 4 riders heading south toward Tucson. The marshal led, followed by Tessa riding double with Adam, with the 2 deputies bringing up the rear. The first day's journey was uneventful, the landscape gradually transitioning from rolling grasslands to more rugged desert terrain. They made camp that night near a small waterhole, the deputies taking turns standing watch. Adam spread his bedroll near Tessa's, close enough to protect her but maintaining a respectful distance. As the fire burned low, Tessa tapped his arm and showed him her slate. "Tell me about California." Adam smiled in the flickering light. "Never been, but I've heard stories. Ocean so vast you can't see the other side, land so fertile you can grow anything. Gold in the mountains and opportunity in the valleys," she wrote. "Sounds like paradise." "Everywhere has its troubles," he said pragmatically, "but it's far from here, far from memories." She nodded thoughtfully, then wrote, "What would we do there?" The "we" didn't escape his notice, and it warmed something in his chest. "Whatever we wanted, I reckon. I could ranch, you could." He trailed off, unsure what opportunities existed for a woman who couldn't speak. Tessa finished his thought on her slate. "I could teach children to read. My voice might be gone, but my mind isn't." Adam smiled at her determination. "That you could." The second day brought rising heat and increasing tension. Marshal Grant rode with one hand never far from his holster, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. By mid-afternoon, they entered a narrow pass between 2 rocky ridges, perfect territory for an ambush. "Keep tight," the marshal called back, eyes sharp. They were halfway through the pass when the first shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dust inches from the marshal's horse. Instantly, the lawman drew his weapon, shouting, "Take cover." Adam yanked on the reins, pulling their horse behind a large boulder as more shots rained down from the ridge. He helped Tessa dismount, positioning her in the shelter of the rock. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his rifle. "Don't move unless I tell you to." The gunfight was chaotic and terrifying. From their position, Adam could see Deputy Rodriguez slumped over his saddle, clearly hit. The marshal and Deputy Hayes had taken cover behind rocks on the opposite side of the trail and were returning fire at unseen assailants on the ridge. Adam aimed carefully at a flash of movement, squeezing the trigger. A pained yell suggested he'd found his mark. The firefight continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, bullets chipping away at the rocks sheltering them. Then, during a brief lull, Adam heard a sound that made his blood freeze, the soft scuffle of boots on gravel behind them. He whirled just as a masked man lunged toward Tessa, knife drawn. Adam fired instinctively, his bullet catching the attacker in the shoulder. The man stumbled but didn't fall, still advancing toward Tessa with deadly intent. Adam launched himself forward, tackling the assailant to the ground. They grappled in the dust, the knife slashing dangerously close to Adam's face. With a desperate surge of strength, Adam managed to pin the man's knife hand, smashing it against a rock until the weapon fell from numbed fingers. A swift punch rendered the attacker unconscious, and Adam scrambled back to Tessa, who was pressed against the boulder, her eyes wide with terror. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, checking her for injuries. She shook her head, then her eyes widened again as she pointed urgently over his shoulder. Adam turned to see another masked figure approaching, gun raised. Before Adam could react, a shot rang out, but not from the approaching gunman. The marshal, having circled around, had fired from behind, dropping the attacker in his tracks. "You two all right?" he called, moving quickly to join them. Adam nodded, his heart still pounding. "Rodriguez," the marshal's face darkened. "Dead. Hayes is hit, but he'll live." They bound the unconscious attacker securely, then searched both fallen men. Neither had mismatched eyes. These weren't Harden, but clearly part of his gang. "They knew we were coming," the marshal said grimly. Someone talked. The implication hung heavy in the air. One of the lawmen, or someone back in Whispering Creek, had betrayed them. They abandoned the plan to reach Tucson, instead making a forced march back toward the nearest settlement, a small mining town called Copper Springs, just half a day's ride away. Deputy Hayes, bleeding from a bullet wound to his thigh, rode double with the marshal. Adam kept their prisoner slumped across his saddle, while Tessa rode Hayes's horse. Night had fallen by the time they reached Copper Springs, a rough collection of buildings clustered around the mine entrance. The local sheriff, a grizzled veteran named McAllister, helped them secure their prisoner in the town's small jail. "Doctors over at the saloon," he informed them, eyeing Hayes's pale face. "Usually is this time of night." The marshal and sheriff took Hayes to find the doctor, leaving Adam and Tessa at the jail with the prisoner, who had regained consciousness and now sat sullenly in his cell. "I ain't talking," he muttered when Adam approached the bars. "So don't waste your breath asking." Adam studied the man, young, maybe 25, with a week's growth of beard and hard eyes that had seen too much violence. "I'm not asking about Harden," he said evenly. "I'm asking who told you we were coming." The prisoner smirked. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Tessa moved to stand beside Adam, her presence drawing the prisoner's attention. His eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "So you're the mute girl," he said with a cruel laugh. "The one that got away. Harden's real anxious to finish what he started with you." Adam's hand clenched into a fist, but Tessa's touch on his arm steadied him. She held up her slate, which read, "Why kill innocent people?" The prisoner shrugged. "Business, nothing personal." Adam felt sick at the casualness with which the man dismissed murder. "Your business took this woman's voice and her family. And she should have died with them," the prisoner spat. "Loose ends get people killed. Like they're gonna kill you for protecting her." Before Adam could respond, the jail door opened as the marshal and sheriff returned. "Hayes is with the doctor," the marshal reported. "He'll pull through." His gaze shifted to the prisoner. "Has he said anything useful?" "Just threats," Adam replied, deliberately not mentioning the hint about a traitor. Until he knew who to trust, he'd keep that information close. The marshal nodded. "We'll question him properly in the morning. For now, you two should get some rest. Sheriff McAllister says there's rooms available at the boarding house down the street." Adam hesitated, reluctant to leave the prisoner unguarded. "Go on," the sheriff encouraged. "We'll take first watch. You can relieve us at dawn." The boarding house was clean but sparse, with 2 small rooms available at the end of a narrow hallway. Adam saw Tessa settled in hers before retiring to his own, though he left his door ajar, alert for any sign of trouble. Sleep eluded him as he turned over the events of the day in his mind. The ambush had been too well planned, the attackers too certain of their route. Someone had betrayed them, but who? The marshal, one of the deputies. Someone back in Whispering Creek. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find Tessa standing there, slate in hand. "Can't sleep. Too afraid." Adam hesitated only briefly before stepping aside to let her in. She sat on the edge of his bed while he took the room's only chair. "We're safe here," he assured her, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. She wrote. "The prisoner said someone told them." "Who? I don't know," Adam admitted, "but we need to be careful who we trust." Tessa nodded, her expression troubled. She wrote, "I keep seeing their faces, my father." "Brother, when it happened," Adam's heart ached for her. "I'm sorry." She continued writing, "You're the only one who's made me feel safe since then." The simple statement touched him deeply. "I'll keep you safe," he promised, "whatever it takes." She looked at him for a long moment, then wrote something he wasn't prepared for. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words on the slate stunned him into silence. Tessa watched his face anxiously, clearly fearing she'd made a terrible mistake in her confession. When he didn't immediately respond, she hurriedly erased the words and wrote, "I'm sorry, forget I wrote that." Adam caught her hand before she could erase again. "Don't be sorry," he said softly. "I just didn't expect it." The truth was, he'd been fighting his own growing feelings for weeks, telling himself it was just protective instinct, just fulfillment of his promise. But seeing the words written so plainly forced him to confront the reality he had fallen in love with her courage, her resilience, her quiet strength. "I think," he said carefully, "that I'm falling in love with you too." Her eyes filled with tears as she wrote, "Even like this, broken." Adam shook his head firmly. "You're not broken, Tessa. You're the strongest person I know." She smiled through her tears, and in that moment, Adam knew with absolute certainty that he would do anything to protect her, to build a life with her if they survived what was coming. "You should try to get some sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be difficult," she nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, she wrote, "Can I stay here, just to sleep? I feel safer with you." Adam nodded, offering her the bed while he prepared to spend the night in the uncomfortable chair. Tessa shook her head, patting the space beside her. Adam hesitated, keenly aware of propriety, but the innocent plea in her eyes convinced him. He lay down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, though she immediately moved closer, resting her head against his shoulder. The simple contact, the trust it implied, moved him deeply. He lay awake long after her breathing had evened into sleep, watching the moonlight create patterns on the ceiling and thinking about the future he suddenly dared to imagine. Dawn broke with a commotion in the street below, shouting, running footsteps, a woman's scream. Adam was instantly alert, gently waking Tessa as he moved to the window. Below, a crowd had gathered outside the jail. Adam pulled on his boots quickly. "Stay here," he told Tessa. "Lock the door behind me." Downstairs, he pushed through the onlookers to find Sheriff McAllister standing grimly in the jail doorway. "What happened?" Adam demanded. "Marshall's dead," the sheriff replied flatly. "Throat cut, prisoners gone." Adam's blood ran cold. Hayes wasn't here. "Still at the doctor's." The sheriff's face was haggard. "Found the marshal about an hour ago when I came to relieve him. Back door was open." Adam entered the jail, taking in the gruesome scene. Marshal Grant lay in a pool of blood, his throat slashed from ear to ear. The cell door stood open, the lock apparently picked. "He couldn't have done this alone," Adam said, examining the lock. "Someone helped him escape." The sheriff nodded grimly. "My thoughts exactly. Question is who?" Deputy Hayes arrived moments later, leaning heavily on a cane, his face ashen when he saw the marshal's body. "Good God," he breathed. "Who would do such a thing?" Adam studied Hayes carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or deception, but saw only genuine shock in the deputy's expression. "We need to get back to Whispering Creek," Adam said decisively. "Warn the sheriff there." Hayes nodded. "I'll wire ahead." "No," Adam interrupted. "No telegrams. We don't know who we can trust." The deputy looked offended, but the sheriff nodded in understanding. "The boy's right. If someone betrayed your location once, they could do it again." Back at the boarding house, Adam found Tessa anxiously waiting. Her face paled as he explained what had happened. She wrote quickly, "We need to leave." "Yes," Adam agreed, "but not the way they'd expect. Not back toward Whispering Creek, at least not directly." He spread out a rough map of the territory on the bed. "We're here," he said, pointing to Copper Springs. "Whispering Creek is northeast. They'll expect us to take the main trail back." His finger traced an alternative route. "But if we head west first, then cut north through the hills here, we can approach from the back way. It's longer but safer." Tessa nodded in agreement, then wrote, "What about Hayes?" "I don't trust him," Adam admitted. "He seems genuine, but—" "But someone helped that prisoner escape," the sheriff said from the doorway, having overheard the last part of their conversation. "And it wasn't me." Adam's hand moved instinctively to his gun. The sheriff raised his hands placatingly. "Easy, son. If I wanted you dead, you would be already." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I've been sheriff in this town for 15 years. I know every lowlife and scoundrel in 100 miles, and I know Jake Harden. Adam's eyes narrowed. You know him, knew him as a boy. His father worked the mine before the black lung took him. Jake was always trouble, but I never thought he'd turn killer. The sheriff sighed heavily. The point is, I want him caught as much as you do, and I don't trust Hayes either. Why not? Adam asked. Call it instinct. 30 years wearing a badge teaches you to smell a lie. The sheriff pulled something from his pocket, a deputy's badge. Found this under the marshal's body. It's Hayes's. Adam frowned. That doesn't prove anything. Could have fallen off in a struggle. Maybe, the sheriff conceded. But Hayes claimed he was at the doctor's all night. Doc tells a different story, says Hayes left around midnight, said he was going to check on the marshal. Tessa's hand flew to her mouth in shock. I confronted Hayes after you came up here, the sheriff continued. He's gone. Took a horse from the livery and rode out east toward Whispering Creek. Adam cursed under his breath. He's warning Harden. Most likely, the sheriff agreed, which means you two need to disappear, fast. They left Copper Springs within the hour, traveling light and fast on horses provided by the sheriff. As Adam had planned, they headed west initially, using the rough country to obscure their trail. The journey was grueling. Summer heat baked the rocky landscape, water was scarce, and the constant fear of pursuit kept them moving even when exhaustion begged for rest. They traveled primarily at night, resting during the hottest part of the day in whatever shade they could find. Tessa never complained, though Adam knew the journey was taking a toll on her. Each night, they slept side by side for warmth and security, their growing feelings for each other a beacon of hope in their desperate situation. On the third night, they made camp in a small canyon, a trickle of a stream providing precious water. As Tessa prepared a meager meal from their dwindling supplies, Adam found himself watching her, the graceful movement of her hands, the determined set of her jaw, the occasional soft smile she offered when she caught him looking. You're amazing, he said suddenly. She looked up in surprise, then reached for her slate. Why? Most people would have broken by now. After everything you've been through, losing your family, your voice, now this. He gestured at their rough camp, but you keep going, keep fighting. She considered his words, then wrote, What choice do I have? That's just it, Adam replied. There's always a choice. You could give up, many would, but you don't. She smiled softly, writing, I have something to live for now. The simple statement filled Adam with both joy and terror, joy at what it implied about her feelings for him, terror at the responsibility it placed on his shoulders, if he failed to protect her. When this is over, he said carefully, what do you want, really want? Tessa thought for a long moment before writing, peace, a home, someone who understands my silence. She hesitated, then added, you. Adam moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. I want that too, all of it. He took a deep breath. If we make it through this, Tessa Dawson, would you consider becoming my wife? Her eyes widened, and for a horrible moment, Adam feared he'd misread everything. Then she was in his arms, nodding vigorously against his chest, her body trembling with silent joy. When she pulled back, her cheeks were wet with tears as she wrote, Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, gently at first, then with increasing passion as she responded eagerly. It was their first kiss, a promise, a beginning, a defiance against the darkness pursuing them. That night, as they lay beneath the vast canopy of stars, their future felt both precarious and infinite. Tomorrow they would continue their journey back to Whispering Creek, where danger surely waited. But tonight, they had this moment of perfect understanding between them. They reached the outskirts of Whispering Creek 5 days after leaving Copper Springs. Adam approached the town cautiously, circling around to enter from the west instead of the main road from the south. We need to find Sheriff Walsh, he told Tessa as they watched the town from a ridge. He's the only one we know for sure isn't involved with Harden. Tessa nodded in agreement, though her expression remained worried. They waited until dusk before entering town, keeping to back alleys and shadows. Adam left Tessa hidden behind the livery stable while he scouted ahead to the sheriff's office. To his relief, he found Walsh alone, poring over wanted posters at his desk. The sheriff's hand flew to his gun when the door opened, relaxing only slightly when he recognized Adam Everett. "Where the hell have you been? Got a telegram from Copper Springs saying the marshal was killed and you and Miss Dawson were missing." "Who sent it?" Adam asked sharply. "Deputy Hayes." The sheriff frowned. "Why? Hayes is working with Hardin," Adam explained quickly. "He helped the prisoner escape after killing the marshal." Walsh's expression darkened. "Hayes rode in 3 days ago, said you'd been ambushed, that he got separated from you in the fighting. He's been helping organize search parties." "Search parties or hunting parties?" Adam asked grimly. "Where is he now?" "Out with a group of men searching the East Road." The sheriff stood, buckling on his gun belt. "If what you're saying is true, we need to move fast. Where's Miss Dawson?" "Safe for the moment, but we need somewhere better to hide her until we can catch Hardin." Walsh thought for a moment. "My sister's place on the north edge of town. Nobody would think to look there. She only moved back last month after her husband died." Adam nodded. "Let's get Tessa first." They slipped out the back of the sheriff's office, but had only gone a few yards when gunshots erupted from the direction of the livery. "Tessa." Adam broke into a run, the sheriff close behind him. They found her pinned down behind a water trough, bullets splintering the wood around her. Across the street, 2 men fired from the cover of an alleyway. Sheriff Walsh drew his revolver, firing back to provide covering fire. "Get her out of there," he shouted to Adam. Adam darted forward in a crouch, reaching Tessa's side as more bullets kicked up dust around them. "Are you hit?" he demanded. She shook her head, her face pale with fear. "When I say go, run to the sheriff," Adam instructed, drawing his own weapon. "I'll cover you." She nodded, tensing to move. "Now." Adam stood, firing rapidly at the alleyway. Tessa sprinted across the open space as bullets followed her path. She reached the sheriff, who pulled her behind the corner of a building. Adam prepared to follow, but as he turned, white-hot pain exploded in his left shoulder. The impact knocked him backward, his gun flying from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Adam!" The sheriff's shout seemed to come from very far away as darkness crowded the edges of Adam's vision. He was vaguely aware of more gunfire, of hands dragging him to safety, of Tessa's tearful face hovering above his. Then nothing. Adam woke to the low murmur of voices and the sharp smell of carbolic. He was lying on a bed, his shoulder bandaged and throbbing painfully. As his vision cleared, he recognized the sheriff's office, converted into a makeshift infirmary. "He's awake," a woman's voice announced the sheriff's sister, Adam guessed, based on the family resemblance as she leaned over him. Tessa appeared instantly at his side, her face showing signs of recent tears but now alight with relief. She clutched his hand as if afraid he might disappear. "What happened?" Adam asked, his voice rough. Sheriff Walsh stepped into view. "You took a bullet meant for Miss Dawson. Doc Miller dug it out, says you'll live, though that arm will be sore for a while. The shooters got one. The other escaped." The sheriff's expression was grim. "But we've got bigger problems. Hayes came back while you were unconscious. He's gathered a group of men, claims you're working with the Blackwater gang, that you killed the marshal." "That's insane," Adam protested, trying to sit up. Pain shot through his shoulder, forcing him back down. "I know that," Walsh said, "but Hayes is convincing and folks are scared. They're forming a posse to hunt you down." Tessa's grip on Adam's hand tightened as she showed him her slate. "We need to leave. Now." "You're in no condition to travel," the sheriff's sister objected. "We don't have a choice," Adam said, gritting his teeth against the pain as he forced himself to sit up. "If they find us here, they'll kill us both." Sheriff Walsh nodded reluctantly. "Margaret, help them pack supplies. I'll saddle horses and meet you out back in 10 minutes. Despite the doctor's protests, Adam was on his feet within minutes, swaying slightly but determined. Tessa supported him as they followed Margaret to the kitchen, where she hurriedly packed food and medical supplies. "There's a line cabin in the foothills," the sheriff said when he returned. "Used by cattle drivers in the winter. It's abandoned this time of year." He handed Adam a crude map. "Stay there until I send word it's safe." "What about Hayes?" Adam asked. "Leave him to me," Walsh replied grimly. "I aim to find out just how deep this conspiracy goes." They slipped out of town as dusk deepened into night, riding north toward the distant mountains. Adam's wounded shoulder made the journey excruciating, but he pushed through the pain, focusing on the need to get Tessa to safety. They reached the line cabin shortly before midnight, a small, sturdy structure built to withstand harsh winters. Inside, they found a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a narrow bed. Tessa immediately set about making the place habitable, lighting the fire and preparing a simple meal while Adam sank gratefully onto a chair, exhaustion and pain overwhelming him. "I'm not much use to you right now," he apologized as she changed his bandage. She shook her head dismissively, writing on her slate, "You've done enough. Rest now." The next few days passed in a haze of pain and fever as infections set in despite their best efforts. Tessa barely left Adam's side, bathing his forehead with cool cloths and forcing willow bark tea between his lips to combat the fever. In his more lucid moments, Adam was struck by the role reversal. Now she was protecting him, caring for him, being his strength when his failed. In his delirium, he sometimes forgot she couldn't speak, carrying on one-sided conversations about their future, about California, about the home they would build together. On the fourth day, his fever broke. He woke to find Tessa slumped in a chair beside the bed, finally succumbing to exhaustion after her constant vigil. In sleep, the worry lines eased from her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Adam watched her, his heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. She had saved his life as surely as he had once saved hers. They were bound now by something deeper than promise or obligation, by love forged in survival, in understanding, in the quiet language they had created between them. When Tessa woke, she found Adam watching her. She blushed, quickly reaching for her slate. "Feeling better?" "Much," he confirmed. "Thanks to you," she smiled, relief evident in her eyes as she wrote. "I was so worried, you kept talking in your sleep." "What did I say?" he asked, somewhat embarrassed. Her smile turned mischievous. "Our house will have blue curtains and a porch swing." Adam laughed, then winced as the movement jarred his shoulder. "Well, I stand by that. Every proper house needs a porch swing." Her expression softened as she wrote, "You also asked me to marry you, again." "I meant it," he said seriously. "Both times," she nodded, writing, "I know, my answer is still yes." Adam's recovery progressed steadily after that. By the end of the week, he could move around the cabin, and by the following week, he was strong enough to chop firewood and hunt small game to supplement their dwindling supplies. Still, there was no word from Sheriff Walsh, and they dared not venture into town to seek news. The isolation, while necessary, weighed on them both as July turned to August with no change in their situation. "We can't stay here forever," Adam said one evening as they sat before the fire. "Sooner or later, we'll have to make a decision: keep running or make a stand." Tessa nodded thoughtfully, then wrote, "I'm tired of running. This is my home." "Our home," Adam corrected gently. "Whatever we decide together." She smiled, leaning against his good shoulder as they watched the flames dance. The simple domesticity of their situation, sharing meals, working together to maintain the cabin, talking in their own way. Late into the night had cemented their bond in ways neither had anticipated. Their peaceful interlude ended abruptly one morning when the distant sound of approaching horses shattered the stillness. Adam grabbed his rifle, positioning Tessa behind him as they peered through the cabin's small window. To their immense relief, it was Sheriff Walsh, accompanied by two men Adam recognized as trusted deputies from Whispering Creek. "It's safe," Walsh announced as he dismounted. "Hayes is dead, so is Hardin." Inside the cabin, the sheriff explained everything over coffee. Hayes had indeed been working with the Blackwater gang, providing information on wealthy homesteads and warning them of law enforcement movements. When Tessa survived the attack on her family, Hayes had been tasked with ensuring she didn't identify any of the gang. "He almost succeeded," Walsh said grimly, "but he got careless. One of the men in his posse overheard him talking to another gang member. They came to me with their suspicions." "What about Hardin?" Adam asked. "Set a trap. Let word spread that you two had been seen near Silver Creek." Hayes took the bait, led us straight to Hardin's hideout. The sheriff's expression was grim. "It was a bloody business, 4 of the gang dead, including Hardin. Hayes tried to run, took a bullet in the back. Tessa's eyes were wide as she wrote. It's really over, Walsh nodded. The territorial governors declared the Blackwater gang officially disbanded. There's still some of them out there, but without Hardin and Hayes, they'll scatter. And Tessa's testimony, Adam asked. Will she still need to appear before a judge? No need now. We have written confessions from 2 gang members who survived. They'll hang, but Miss Dawson won't have to face them again. The sheriff smiled at Tessa. You can go home now. Home. The word hung in the air between them. Tessa's homestead still stood, but could it ever truly be home again after the tragedy that had occurred there? As if reading his thoughts, Tessa wrote, I want to sell the homestead. Adam looked at her in surprise. Are you sure? It's all you have left of your family. She shook her head, writing firmly, My family lives in my heart, not in that cabin. Too many bad memories there. Adam understood. Some places couldn't be reclaimed, some wounds couldn't be healed by returning to where they were inflicted. What will you do? The sheriff asked them both. Adam looked at Tessa, who nodded encouragingly. We're getting married, he said simply. And then, I think, California. Walsh smiled broadly. Well, now that calls for a celebration. When's the wedding? As soon as possible, Adam replied, taking Tessa's hand. We've waited long enough. They were married 2 weeks later in Whispering Creek's small church. The town turned out in force, drawn as much by the dramatic story of their survival as by genuine affection. Abigail, now mother to a healthy baby boy, stood as Tessa's witness, while the sheriff stood for Adam. Tessa wore a simple white dress with a blue ribbon at her throat, covering the scar that had taken her voice. When the preacher asked if she took Adam as her husband, she nodded, her eyes speaking volumes that her voice could not. Adam's vow was brief but powerful. I promise to speak for you until I die, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the church. Today I promise more to love you, protect you, and build a life with you, wherever that life takes us. As they exchanged rings, simple bands purchased with the proceeds from the sale of Tessa's homestead, Adam felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. The celebration afterward was joyous, the town's way of both welcoming them back and bidding them farewell. Their plans to leave for California were well known, and though many expressed regret at their departure, all understood their desire for a fresh start. As the sun set on their wedding day, Adam and Tessa slipped away from the festivities to the small house they'd rented for their final weeks in Whispering Creek. Tomorrow would bring preparations for their journey west, but tonight belonged to them alone, their first night as husband and wife. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Tessa reached for her slate, which had become as much a part of her as her own hands. She wrote by the light of a single candle, I never thought I could be this happy again. Adam traced the words with his finger, then looked into her eyes. This is just the beginning, he promised. Our story is just starting. She smiled, writing, Tell me more about our house in California. Well, he began, drawing her close, it will have blue curtains and a porch swing, of course, and a big garden for you to grow flowers and vegetables. Maybe an apple tree or two. She nodded encouragingly, and he continued, painting their future with words as he had been doing since the day he promised to speak for her. We'll have a room full of books for you to teach reading, and enough land for me to raise horses. Good, strong horses that our children can learn to ride. He paused, watching her face. Would you like that? Children? Her eyes shimmered with tears as she nodded emphatically, writing, Our children will have your voice and my heart. And they'll know your story, Adam added softly. How brave their mother is. How she faced the worst the world could offer and still found the strength to love. Tessa set aside her slate then, communicating in the more primal language of touch and gaze and heartbeat as they consummated their vows in the tender darkness. 2 weeks later, they boarded a westbound stage, the first leg of their journey to California. Tessa wore a new blue dress and carried her slate in a leather satchel Adam had made specifically for it. Their few possessions, mostly practical items for starting a new life, were packed in trunks strapped to the top of the coach. As the stage pulled away from Whispering Creek, Tessa looked back at the town that had been both the site of her greatest tragedy and the birthplace of her deepest love. She squeezed Adam's hand, pointing to her slate, which read, No regrets, He kissed her forehead gently. "None," he agreed, "only forward now." The journey to California was arduous, but filled with wonder as they crossed landscapes neither had seen before: towering mountains, vast deserts, ancient forests. They traveled by stage and train, occasionally stopping in towns along the way when Adam found temporary work to supplement their savings. By late October, they reached the Sacramento Valley, where the soil was rich and the climate mild. Using the last of their money from the sale of Tessa's homestead, they purchased a small farm with an apple orchard and a view of distant mountains. The house was weathered but sound, needing only minor repairs and the woman's touch that Tessa was eager to provide. True to his word, Adam hung blue curtains in the windows and built a sturdy porch swing where they could sit in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that rivaled any artist's palette. Their first winter in California was mild compared to the harsh seasons they'd known in Arizona territory. They planted a garden in spring, and by summer, the land was beginning to reflect their care and vision. Adam found work training horses for nearby ranches, while Tessa, true to her dream, began teaching reading to several local children whose families couldn't afford formal schooling. Her methods were unconventional by necessity, but effective. Without a voice to sound out letters, she devised visual systems and games that engaged the children's minds. Word of her success spread, and soon she had a waiting list of students eager to learn from the silent teacher. In their second year in California, Tessa discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought both joy and fear: joy at the fulfillment of their dream of family, fear that she would be unable to call out if her child was in danger. Adam understood her concerns without her needing to write them. "We'll manage," he assured her. "I'll always be within earshot, and our child will learn your silent language from the cradle." He was right. Their daughter, Sarah, born in the spring of 1878, seemed to understand her mother's gestures and expressions almost from birth. By the time she could toddle, she was translating for Tessa when Adam wasn't present, her childish voice declaring with complete confidence what her mother wished to convey. As promised, Adam told Sarah the story of her mother's bravery and of the promise he had made that day in Whispering Creek. The tale became a bedtime favorite, though Adam was careful to soften the more frightening aspects for young ears. "And then," he would conclude, Sarah's eyes drooping with sleep, "your mama and I came to California to build our home and wait for you to join us." "And you still speak for mama," Sarah would murmur sleepily. "I always will," Adam would reply, tucking the blankets around her, "till the day I die." Life settled into the peaceful rhythm they had dreamed of during those desperate days hiding from Hardin's gang. Their farm prospered. Their family grew with the addition of a son, Thomas, in 1880, and later, another daughter, Rebecca, in 1883. All three children learned to read early under Tessa's tutelage, and all three developed the intuitive understanding of their mother's silent communication. To them, it was simply how their family functioned, their father's voice complementing their mother's expressive silence. They received occasional letters from Whispering Creek, mostly from Abigail, who had had 2 more children and whose husband now owned the largest cattle operation in the territory. Sheriff Walsh retired, but continued to write yearly, keeping them informed of the town's growth and changes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Adam surprised Tessa with a special gift, a beautiful music box that played the wedding song that had been performed at their ceremony. As the delicate melody filled their bedroom, he took her hands in his. "10 years ago," he said softly, "I promised to speak for you till I die. I hope I've kept that promise well." Tessa's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, reaching for her slate, not the original, which was carefully preserved in a cedar box, but a newer one she used daily. She wrote, "You have given me more than a voice. You have given me a life I never thought possible." Adam kissed her then, as tenderly as on their wedding day. "You know," he said afterward, "I think I got the better end of our bargain." She raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Well," he explained with a smile, "you've never once nagged me or said an unkind word." Tessa's silent laughter shook her body as she playfully swatted his arm. Then she wrote, I've thought plenty of unkind words when you track mud through my clean kitchen, see. But I never heard them, Adam teased, drawing her into his arms again. As they celebrated their anniversary, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, both reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. A tragedy that took Tessa's voice had ultimately given her a man who would speak for her, love her, and build a life with her that transcended the silence between them. The years continued to flow by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Sarah, their eldest, grew into a compassionate young woman who inherited her father's way with horses and her mother's quiet strength. At 20, she married the son of a neighboring rancher, giving Adam and Tessa their first grandchild the following year. Thomas, always adventurous, joined the newly formed Forest Service, protecting the magnificent redwood forests that had captivated him since childhood. Though his work took him away for months at a time, he returned regularly with stories that Adam would read aloud while Tessa listened, her eyes reflecting the pride she felt for her son's conservation work. Rebecca, their youngest, showed an exceptional talent for music, learning to play both piano and violin with a sensitivity that moved listeners to tears. She speaks through music the way you speak through silence, Adam once told Tessa as they watched their daughter perform at a community gathering. Life brought its share of hardships, drought years that threatened the orchard, a fire that destroyed the barn, quickly rebuilt by neighbors, the passing of old friends from Whispering Creek. But through it all, the foundation Adam and Tessa had built remained unshaken. In 1901, 25 years after the gunshot that had changed their lives, they hosted a celebration at the farm. Their children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends they'd made in California, and a few special guests who had traveled from Arizona, now a state rather than a territory. Among them was William Walsh, Jr., son of the former sheriff, who had followed in his father's footsteps into law enforcement. The elder Walsh had passed away the previous winter, and his son had brought a package his father had left for Adam and Tessa. "Pa said to give you this on your 25th anniversary," the younger Walsh explained, handing over a carefully wrapped parcel. Inside, they found Sheriff Walsh's badge along with a letter. Adam read it aloud to Tessa that night after the celebrations had ended and they were alone on their porch swing. "Dear Adam and Tessa," it began, "if you're reading this, I've gone to my final rest. Don't waste any tears on me. I lived a good, long life. But as I'm facing my end, I find myself thinking about beginnings, and yours has always stuck with me. I've seen a lot of courage in my years wearing this badge, but few things have moved me as much as the sight of a wounded girl who'd lost everything and the quiet cowboy who promised to be her voice. The badge I've enclosed isn't worth much in material terms, but it represents something I think you'll understand: the promise to protect, to serve, to stand for what's right even when it's hard. You too have honored that promise in the way you've lived your lives. I've kept up with your news through Abigail's letters, the children you've raised, the community you've built, the difference you've made." Tessa may have lost her physical voice that day, but through you, Adam, and through your children, and through all the young ones she's taught to read, her voice has carried further than she could have ever shouted. Be proud of the life you've made. Know that somewhere I'm raising a glass to you both. Your friend always, Benjamin Walsh. Tessa's cheeks were wet with tears as Adam finished reading. She took her slate, the same one she'd used for decades now, its wooden frame polished by years of handling, and wrote, "He was there at the beginning." Adam nodded, his own eyes moist. "He was a good man." She nodded, then added, "Like you." Adam smiled, putting an arm around her shoulders as the porch swing creaked gently beneath them. At 53, his hair was more salt than pepper now, and lines had etched themselves around his eyes and mouth, laugh lines, mostly testament to the joy that had defined their life together. Tessa's golden hair had faded to silver, but her eyes were as expressive as ever, still capable of conveying paragraphs with a single glance. "Did you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Staying with me, coming to California?" Tessa looked at him with surprise, then wrote emphatically, "Never. Not for a single moment, even with." He gestured vaguely at her throat, she shook her head firmly, writing, "My silence gave me you, fair trade." Adam chuckled, the familiar ache in his heart whenever he thought of what she'd lost balanced by the wonder of what they'd built together. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "that day in Whispering Creek when I said I'd speak for you till I die, I had no idea what I was promising. I just knew I couldn't bear the thought of you being alone with your silence." Tessa nodded understanding, then wrote, "You kept your promise." "More than kept it. I always will," he replied, kissing her forehead as the sunset gilded the orchard before them, and he did for another 20 years, until age finally claimed him in the winter of 1921. Even then, as he lay in their bed, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, his last words were for her. "I love you, Tessa," he whispered, his voice faint but still carrying the strength of conviction that had defined him. "In this life and whatever comes after." She held his hand as he slipped away, her tears falling silently as they had that day in 1876 when he had first promised to be her voice. But Tessa Everett was not left voiceless. In the days and years that followed, her children and grandchildren continued the tradition Adam had begun, instinctively translating her gestures, reading her written words aloud, speaking for her as naturally as they spoke for themselves. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings when she sat alone on the porch swing he had built, Tessa could almost hear Adam's voice on the wind, still speaking for her, still keeping his promise, a promise that had transcended tragedy, defied violence, and ultimately created a love story that would be told in her family for generations to come. A love story that had begun with a gunshot and a vow, with the sheriff's grim pronouncement and a cowboy's determined reply. "Then I'll speak for her till I die."